Good evening. My name is Rita Hicks, and on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Houston Education Fund and Houston Media Source, I'd like to welcome you to Conversations with the Candidates, Runoff Candidates for Houston City Controller. With me tonight as my co-host is League of Women Voters Rising Star Quentin Wiltz. And we are doing the format just a little bit differently tonight. Rather than taking the candidates in turn, we're actually going to have a conversation with both of them at once to talk about the issues and inform you at home who you'd like to vote for on Election Day, which is coming up this Saturday, December 12th. If you have not yet early voted, the polls are still open tonight until 7 o'clock. But if you don't make it there tonight, be sure to turn out on Saturday to vote for the candidates that you see on your ballot that you agree with. If you are interested in learning more about this race and all of the other races that are on your ballot, you can visit the League of Women Voters website at vote411.org and search your ballot by zip code to read all about the candidates that are going to be on it when you show up to vote on Saturday, if you haven't already. And if you have, thank you so much for turning out to vote. So I'm going to turn it over to Quentin, who's going to introduce our two candidates for tonight, Mr. Chris Brown and Mr. Bill Fraser.
Thanks, Rita. Welcome. I'd like to first introduce Mr. Fraser. Bill Fraser is a CPA with over 35 years of experience. He served as CFO of CBRE Capital Markets, one of the world's leading commercial real estate financial services firms. As a board member of GIMSA Loan Services, he helped form one of the nation's largest commercial real estate loan management and advisory service companies. Bill has been a licensed CPA since 1975. He's past president of the Houston CPA Society and served on the board of directors of Texas Society of CPAs for the past 20 years. He's actively involved in his church. He's a member of St. Martin's Episcopal and served on its vestry and is currently a member of its senior council. Bill and his wife Jean have two children, Jennifer and Jeremy, who both attended public schools in Houston through high school. Jennifer graduated from Rice University and Jeremy graduated from SMU. And we also have Chris Brown. Mr. Brown began his career 2 decades ago as a trader for Coastal Securities, an investment bank where he focused on analysis of high-tech stocks. After several years, Chris co-founded an equity trading firm. Chris, as head of operations for the equity trading firm, gained firsthand experience with risk management, compliance, reporting, building operations, and negotiating complex agreements. For the past 11 years, Chris has worked at Houston City Hall. In his current position, Chris serves as Chief Deputy City Controller, where he manages the day-to-day operations and leads the executive division of the Controller's Office. Chris is a member of the City of Houston's Investment Committee and also supervises the compiling of the city's comprehensive annual financial report, CAFR, and has helped lead efforts to expand Bank of Houston, a public-private partnership which works to improve Houstonians' financial literacy and independence. Chris is a fourth-generation Houstonian. He has deep roots in the Houston community. He attended Briar Grove Elementary and Lee High School, while he was swim team varsity letterman. His family was a member of St. John's Episcopal Church. Chris attended TCU and obtained a Bachelor's of Business Administration and Finance, and later a Master's in Business Administration from the University of Houston. Chris, his wife, Divya, an attorney, and their newborn daughter, Milana, reside in Southwest Houston.
So welcome, gentlemen. Quentin, if you would like to offer up the first question.
I would. Thank you. This one just kind of settle the mood a bit.
Okay.
As a controller, what would your 3 top priorities be in carrying out your job and serving Houstonians? So I'll let you gentlemen decide who goes first, but I'll repeat the question. As controller, what would your 3 top priorities be in carrying out your job and serving Houstonians?
Okay, well, I'll go first. I think the three top priorities right now are solving our pension funds. I would work with the new mayor and city council in trying to address that issue. We've had many years of underfunding our pension funds, and we need to address that very carefully and thoughtfully so that our city employees are not taken advantage of. I believe that they should have a fair retirement program, but I also believe that we should have a plan that we can afford and the taxpayers will agree to. So that'd be one priority. Another priority would be to establish a audit committee for the city, an independent audit committee, so that the city and the controller's office and the mayor and city council can know that things are being addressed and addressed in an independent point of view, and that there's try to take the politics out of some of the programs that might be targeted, and also to make sure that the annual report is issued on time. And then I think in that vein, one of the things is I would like to increase and firm up a lot of the internal auditing functions that the city has right now, and try to expand that program to make sure that many of the departments that are a little bit more high risk and that affect the taxpayers receive a good thorough overview, and we can find out where we can cut some expenses in running the city.
Well, I think that my priorities are first and foremost to address the $126 million planned budget deficit for our next fiscal year. That obviously is a challenge given the current economic state with the declining prices of oil, and that needs to be addressed immediately. Second, I believe that addressing our long-term pension unfunded liability is of a paramount importance. We need to be able to address that so that we can have long-term financial stability in our city budget. And finally, we need to address the practice of having a structurally unbalanced budget. That's unfortunately been something that I think over the last 12 years we haven't been exactly balancing based on revenue versus expenses. We've used a lot of one-time financing sources and transfers from other funds to shore up our annual budget. Those are three priorities. I think also the ongoing operations of the controller's office, managing the debt portfolio, managing the investment portfolio, getting the audits out on time, and doing financial forecastings are also things that I will do day one as your next controller.
Thank you. So, Mr. Brown, we'll let you go first on this one. One of the city controller's functions is to serve as a financial watchdog for the citizens of the city. So what are your plans to, if you were elected as controller, to better explain the city's fiscal situation to the general public?
Yeah, I think that's an ongoing challenge, and before this program started, I think we were talking, Rita, a little bit about it. The controller's position is one that not a lot of constituents know exactly what we do. One of the things that I've recommended in trying to bring that and make it more transparent is to do a quarterly town hall, and we would do these basically every 3 months in the different quadrants of the city, and allow constituents and taxpayers to come out and ask poignant questions about the controller's office and what it does. I think on the campaign trail, the number one question I got was, well, what does the controller's office actually do? So there needs to be more education with the public about that, and I'll be looking to do that as your next controller.
Great. Mr. Fraser?
Well, I agree. I think town hall meetings are good, but I think we need to do more than just quarterly meetings. And you know, right now we don't even have our annual financial statement that's been issued for June 30th, 2015. So the latest financial statement we have is June 30th, 2014. And I think that one of the things that I would do is to make sure we get more timely reporting, and also use some technology, go out on the internet and make sure that there are some dashboards and very clear, concise reporting to the public on the status of various programs, such as the drainage fee and some of the CIP projects that are being carried on. Right now, all of that, there's very little transparency, there's very little reporting. So I would go out and talk to people and listen to them, but I do believe that the reporting needs to be ongoing and clear and concise, and something that people can understand, and better use of technology.
Right.
It's interesting, and I'll stay on you for a bit because that segues directly into the next question. So we'll ask you, and then you can ask Chris as well, because it came up a lot. Transparency, over and over, transparency and transparency, and we are in a a very technologically advanced age now. I think most people would agree. And every component, even more critical components for city government, it's important to build trust with citizens. So what role do you believe the controller should play in pushing for greater transparency between the city government, and the actual taxpayer, the Houstonians?
Well, I think the role as an independent elected official is very important. The controller is elected by the taxpayers. The controller doesn't report to the mayor or the city council. And so when you talk about transparency, you have the ability to actually say what's going on without sugarcoating it or maybe showing it a slightly different way. I do believe that there are a lot of different programs that need to be reported on. For instance, a capital improvement program where you've got all these various projects. Those projects need to be more clearly communicated, and then some of the information on things like the TERSs need to be more transparent. So the controller should be the watchdog for the taxpayers. The controller should represent the taxpayer's voice to make sure that all the financial aspects of the office are clearly and accurately reported. Controller should not engage particularly in debate on certain policy decisions unless it has serious financial ramifications.
Okay.
Well, I'll first start on the transparency measure, and I think that's the key, and we talked a little bit about technology and utilizing technology. One of the things that we put into place at the City Controller's office was to have online database of vendor checks and payments that the city's making. So it was the first time in history, actually, that we'd had that online. So that's an example of utilizing technology to increase transparency. I think the independence function of the Controller's office can't be stressed enough. We don't report to the mayor. We don't report to the council members. We are the watchdog for the taxpayers. And through reporting measures, through the monthly financial and operations reports, through the comprehensive annual financial report, that's the annual audit, those things help to increase the level of transparency. But another point that is very important is the audit function. And we've been very aggressive about doing audits. We've done now 53 audits in the last 58 months. We've identified approximately $13 million in savings. And that's an important transparency delivery method, because that is one that looks retroactively to see as the projects and contracts are laid out, was this money spent in the most efficient manner? And we can take a look back and we can make sure that taxpayer dollars are spent most efficiently. And there again is an example of increased transparency.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So this one is for you, Chris. We've been talking about how, in some respects, the controller's role with respect to citizens is one of informing, but you also have a role with respect to city government, and that's of influencing. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to hear, what's your vision for being an effective influencer of fiscal policy in Houston?
Yeah, it's a challenge for the controller's office because, as it's been mentioned many times on the campaign trail, we have a voice but not an actual vote. Mayor sets the agenda, council members vote on that agenda. But what we do have is we have a voice that we can sound off on financial issues. For example, I'm going to be very vocal about this $126 million deficit because, as the historical perspective that I have, having worked in the office for 6 years, in 2010 we knew we had a $100 million deficit on the heels of the Great Recession, the housing crisis. It was paramount that we address that in a timely manner. And being vocal about the timing of addressing that issue is really important because as the fiscal year goes through, you can only get savings every month. So if you don't implement those savings, say in the first month of the fiscal year, you won't be able to bridge that deficit. So having they've used the term bully pulpit. I'm not a fan of that, but I think just being very vocal about financial matters like the expected deficit, pension unfunded liabilities, and the structurally imbalanced budget. And that's something I will be very vocal on as your next controller.
Mr. Frazier, what's your vision for being an effective influencer of fiscal policy in Houston?
Well, I think the just through the operations of the controller's department, the audit function, the controller should be looking at various programs, not only from a financial standpoint, but to ensure that those programs are accomplishing their stated objective. And when there's some inefficiencies that are being found, there needs to be follow-up on it. You know, there were some audits that were done when Anise Parker was controller on some programs like a program that Xerox was running, and some data transfers and some things that they were supposed to be collecting money on for ambulance services. And they found like $4.7 million of cost savings there, or money that should have been collected. And so throughout the period after that, there's never been any follow-up on it. And it's estimated that there could be as much as $40 million of savings that we've not accomplished under that program. So there needs to be some follow-up, and you need to review that program, get with the department heads that are responsible for it. So do it from bottom up and make sure that the people who are involved in these programs are doing the right job, and then communicating with City Council so that they can understand what's going on, and then collaborating with the mayor. The mayor oversees all the departments, so the mayor should know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and try to correct some of these issues that might come up so that we can have long-term savings. And the controller should also collaborate with the mayor to develop a long-term financial strategy, so that the city has a long-term financial strategy, and then as things come up, to make sure that whatever program is coming up falls within that financial standard or financial plan, and then the taxpayers can hold their elected representatives accountable for sticking to that plan.
Thank you.
Here's a did you know moment for those of you at home. Did you know that the city's checkbook is actually available online for any citizen to review? And I think part of the problem that many people don't know it is that it seems difficult to access the data and to also review it. So the questions are kind of combined. How do you plan to improve the online checkbook and make it, one, more understandable, and two, more accessible?
Well, when you read my bio, I was a founding director of Jim Salone Services. We managed over $150 billion of investments in the commercial real estate field, and we had over 100 institutional clients and thousands of borrowers. And we managed the tax payments, their insurance policies, all kinds of things. And all that information was online and available to them, and they had log-on capabilities. They could see what checks we'd issued. They could see what bills had been paid, what taxes had been paid, what taxes hadn't been paid, and they could pull down documentation that was online, and it was a very secure system. It was managed by GE Capital Real Estate. So I would bring some of my experience in developing that system to the City of Houston and the Controller's Office in particular, so that taxpayers can access information like that if they need to, and also vendors who might be expecting a payment. They can see what has been paid, and to try to make sure that all that type of information is more easily accessible and can be viewed at any time.
Okay.
Well, it's a good point to note that is now available online. I actually led the project team to put that online for the first time in the city's history. But we need to take it to the next step. Part of the reason is I think that the link is on the controller's website, which probably doesn't get as much traffic. My idea for increased transparency and getting more information to the citizens is to look at best practices. And I've actually spent quite a bit of time researching this. The City of New York, for example, has probably one of the most robust online checkbook systems called Checkbook NYC. And we've talked with the groups there. They have an open source code. We're going to be utilizing that free open source code, bringing that to Houston and putting that online. It's important to note that that's an open source code because that's actually a free coding database and won't require a new developer to come in and spend millions of dollars to try and put up a system. We do need a linkage between our current SAP system and that back-end software, but we'll be able to hopefully through the hackathon, I know we talked about this at the Houston Technology Conference, Rita, you were there last time, utilize some public-private partnerships because as I said before, we have a $126 million planned budget deficit, so we're not going to have a lot of money to do expensive software programs. So we got to try and do more with less. And I think that Checkbook NYC is something that we can do with a reasonable amount of investment, and it will be a very robust system and add a huge amount of transparency for the taxpayer. And we'll have that available on the splash page, on the main page, because that would be a joint effort between ERP, IT, the mayor's office, the controller's office, and finance. Get buy-in from everyone, so make it easily and more accessible to the taxpayer.
Great, thank you. So, Chris, this one goes to you. Obviously, Quentin has read for our viewers at home your bios, and so they know a little bit about you. But the role of controller, in some respects, can be a highly technical one. There are skills that you have to do the job well. So, I'm wondering if each of you can take a moment and talk about the unique skills that you bring to the table that you think qualify you for the role.
Mm-hmm. Well, sure. I started my career working for an investment bank here in town. I was licensed by the Security and Exchange Commission, Series 7, 63, 55, and 24. Don't expect anyone out there to know what those licenses actually mean, but they're important because these were tests that I had to take to be able to manage money in the private sector. And essentially what the controller's office does is we have a huge investment and debt portfolio. Now we manage that in-house, which is unique, but smaller cities actually manage that money through a private investment manager. So if you were to hire somebody in the private sector, you would actually hire someone like me that had those licenses, that understood the market and trading dynamics, and was able to, through the Security and Exchange Commission and FINRA, be licensed to be able to actually transact. There are also a lot of managerial duties. The controller gets referred to often as the CFO, but the controller is actually the CEO of the controller's department. We have 63 employees, and knowing all the different operations, the day-to-day activities, these are all things that take years to learn how to do. And fortunately for myself, I've been in the office. I've not only learned the city budget, but I've learned the inner dealings of daily operations of the controller's office. So I am uniquely qualified in this race to be able to go in and on day one start taking care of business, as they say, and being able to operate those day-to-day operations from the controller's standpoint.
Great. Mr. Fraser?
Well, I've been a CPA for 40 years. I've been in the financial services industry most of that time, either as in the financial services industry for commercial real estate for 26 years at CBRE Capital Markets, and prior to that, 5 years with Ernst & Ernst on their audit team. So I've got broad auditing experience, and with CBRE Capital Markets, we were, like I said, the largest commercial real estate investment banking firm in the country. We originated over $25 billion in debt and equity financings a year. I was also the chief operating officer for a number of years, and have a very firm hand on all areas of finance, both large and small, for all different kinds of offerings. And we manage that debt portfolio. So we have we had a lot of different things going on. We were the largest originator for Freddie Mac, and one of my partners, Peter Donovan, was president of the National Multi-Housing Committee, and was very broad in HUD FHA type activities for senior housing and for low-income housing. So I think I'm uniquely qualified to bring all the experience I had in the private sector to the city, so that we can begin to solve some of these very pressing problems that we have.
So, and I actually have a follow-up question because, Chris, as you mentioned, city controller, it's not just one person job. You have to build a good team in order to serve the city. So we'll start with you this time, Mr. Fraser. Can you talk about how you would build a team for the controller's office to work for the city?
Well, you need a broad basis, particularly in the internal audit area. A lot of times people think that all the internal auditors are accountants and whatever, but if you look at other cities and how they've structured their internal auditing department, they'll have engineers, they'll have people with experience in construction and in construction of roads or whatever. And so you want to build a team that can go out and actually be or lead teams of subject matter experts in that area. And also there should be a select group of outside vendors that specialize in certain areas that can do that work. I had a team working for me of accountants, and we had loan officers, we had lawyers, we had engineers, we had all those various types of people, because when you go out and do a commercial real estate project, there are a variety of things you need to know about environmental aspects of it, which I think are very important, as well as the financial side and the marketing side, how you're going to get tenants, and all that. So you need a broad spectrum of people. I can reach into to my colleagues in that area. I've still got major contacts, so I've got the ability to go out and find good people and bring them in if we need to. And I'm not saying that the people on the staff right now, there's probably some very qualified people there, and I hope to be able to keep as many of them as possible.
And Chris, how would you go about building a team to serve the city?
Well, I think obviously I've been working with a team that I believe is quite competent. We've done some fantastic things. Our Treasury division, for example, we have refunded $4.5 billion of the $13 billion in debt, saving the city taxpayer to date $587 million, and that's over the next 12 years. And that's an interest cost savings on debt service. So we actually hired from Harris County one of the finance and treasury people there and brought them in. I think the key and the difference probably between Mr. Frazier and I is not only do I recognize the talent that we currently have in place, but I would really stress people that have an understanding and direct job experience, on-the-job training, as you would. From my personal experience as the Chief Deputy Controller, I understand that it's one thing, the private sector experience I had coming into the city, but it's a totally different thing to be able to understand the inner workings of the Controller's office and how all these different departments function. So I will be continuing to add, I would say, to my current team and bringing on folks that had specific experience to the roles in the Controller's office so that we can do more audits, we can refinance more debt, we can get reports out faster, and I will also say that I believe that our audit division that currently has 10 auditors needs to be increased. We had 53 audits in the last 58 months and saved $12.5 million, and I think that's exceptional, but I wonder what would happen if we had 15 or 20 auditors. So I will definitely be adding to the audit division and trying to invest resources there that we can get a return on investment for our taxpayer dollars.
Okay. That 2 for 1, I like that. So, we've talked, and it's been mentioned about the budget and the deficit. And so over the next 4 years, how would you see, if elected, your office, the Controller's office's role in assisting the mayor with departmental performance evaluations and savings recommendations? I don't know who's up now.
I guess that's maybe me.
Yeah.
Well, I think first and foremost through the audit function, we have an enterprise risk assessment. We do that evaluation every year. Through that, we identify areas of risk and potential savings. That's usually weighted on aggregate dollar volume or dollar amounts. Then we build the audit plan, and in that audit plan, we have audits that we plan to do every single city department every 3 to 4 years. So we'll continue to push and make sure that we're very inclusive for all these different departments. Again, I think the key is to getting more auditors because we need more resources. You think we have 24 departments, we have 23,000 employees, and we have 10 city auditors that are auditing those departments. Now, we do have an outside audit division, but through the budget cuts, a lot of that money has been reduced. So we have less money to spend on external auditors to help and reinforce what we do with our internal audit function. But I think really the key and the focus is making an investment, and I will be encouraging the next mayor to say that if we make an investment in the audit division, we'll be able to identify more savings, and ultimately that'll be beneficial for the mayor's administration and the city and the taxpayers.
Well, Chris has mentioned, the 53 audits they've done. By the way, Niece Parker did 150 in her 6 years, so that's been quite a decrease. But internal audits alone and is not going to bridge the gap. We've got, like I mentioned at the outset, we've got some pension expenses that are way over the line. We've had $400 million a year in annual pension payments that have been required. We've only been able to pay $300 million of that. So we've been building up this $100 million deficit year after year over 12 years. So we've got $1.2 billion in unpaid pension liabilities that we were supposed to have paid over the past 12 years, and at 8.5% interest rate, that's $100 million a year in interest costs alone. So we have to make some fundamental changes in the way that our city is structured, and we have to make some fundamental changes in the way our expenses go out the door. About 70% of our expenses are on people costs. We need to make sure that all those people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and frankly, City Council and the Mayor is going to have to make some hard choices on how to balance that budget. And as controller, I will be collaborating with them to make sure that we don't cut essential services, but that they know where the cuts lie that they're going to have to make in order to balance that budget.
Well, some of our viewers at home may know, or maybe not, because I didn't until I began preparing for this segment, but it's actually uncommon for a city controller to be elected. There are only a few major cities in the country where the city controller is elected. But this unique system means that, as you've both mentioned, the city controller is responsible directly to citizens and not to city government in carrying out his or her duties. So as a result, you serve this checks and balance functions, and you can find yourself sort of at odds with the mayor and city council over certain policy issues, particularly relating to finances. And what I'm curious about is, if you're elected, are there any existing fiscal policies you already know you'll push to change, and what would your suggestions be for changing them?
Well, I think it's good that the controller is elected. I know there are not very many cities that do that, but without being elected and having to report to the mayor, you wouldn't be able to make any relevant recommendations that they might have to respond to. So anyway, one of the things I keep bringing back to the forefront is the pensions. I don't know which candidate's going to get elected mayor, but we need to make some changes in our pension fund so that we can afford to pay what we promise. Right now, the employees know that, except for the firefighters who we've been making payments on their fund 100% every year except for the last couple of years, we need to make 100% of the required payment. And if we don't do that, and the mayor doesn't want to do that, then we're going to butt heads, because I really believe that if we don't make the payment, we're going to get further into debt, and we're pushing that obligation down the road, and we have to stop doing that.
Chris?
Well, as I mentioned before, our structurally imbalanced budget, that would be probably the first thing as controller I would, from a policy standpoint, try and get kind of a refocusing on. We produce a monthly report called the Monthly Financial Operations Report. In that, we have a line item that is net current activity. In essence, that's our expenses less our revenues. And for most months and most fiscal years, that's a negative number. And I think trying to educate the public, the council members, all the people that are involved with the city budget, and really focusing on that number. Not to get too technical, but we focus more on the undesignated reserve fund balance, which is our ending fund balance every year. And I think the mistake is that we're essentially taking net assets and we're converting that to cash to pay our operational budgets. And from a policy standpoint, I think that's a bad fiscal policy. I've been told for many years that it's acceptable under our general accounting principles, but again, I think it's bad fiscal policy. I think it is important to note that the current Budget and Fiscal Affairs Chair, Councilmember Costello, and I co-authored a financial policies that was adopted this last year, and those policies will be a great guiding tool for council and the mayor and for the public to see whether or not the city is making smart budgetary decisions. For example, not deferring pension payments, having a structurally balanced budget, things of that nature. So from a policy standpoint, that will be something that I will be continuing to push and bring to the public forefront so that we'll make sure we're making smart financial decisions.
Okay. So this next question, I'd like to take it in two parts and break it up. So I'll kind of focus on the first part, and I'll address it to you. So we spoke earlier about the city's online checkbook and how it can be improved. And I know we hinted also at some innovations, I guess, that can be brought to the table. But there are a number of other technological challenges the city, and particularly the Controller's Office, faces. So can you discuss with us what you believe the role of technology should be in helping the Controller's Office carry out its work for the city?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, two things come to mind, and we've talked before about the checkbook, putting that online in a more robust system with the Checkbook NYC, which I would dub Checkbook HOU. We also we need to utilize technology to create efficiencies, and I think one of the things we've talked a lot about in the Controller's Office is moving to a paperless environment, specifically with our accounts payable. We do now make upwards of 90% of our check payments through ACH, so that's electronically, as opposed to printing a actual check. So that's one example of that. But moving actually all those invoices from vendors to where we're getting those electronically, it not only creates efficiencies, but it cuts down on potential issues with errors and such. That's an example of utilizing technology. I think also with our contracts and our agendas, if you look at the city, we're still printing hundreds of pages of paper and moving that from multiple departments. I think the city needs to start to move into the 21st century and get an automated system so that it's electronic and we're not carrying hundreds of pounds of paper from department to department, because there will be a huge cost savings there, and it'll speed up the process and save taxpayers money. So just to close and answer your question, technology needs to be utilized to create efficiencies and ultimately save money.
Mr. Fraser.
Well, we've been doing that sort of thing for years at CPRE. I mean, this is a technology that pretty much every person out there who can operate a cell phone or a laptop already has. And it's almost shocking to know that the city is moving so much paper around. I mean, paperless workflow systems have been around for a decade or more. And, we had that type of system at CBRE and at Jimson Loan Services. It's very effective. We had all loan documents were electronic for about the past 7 or 8 years. We didn't have to travel to New York to close a loan. We could do everything at our desks. So bringing that type of technology to the Controller's Office is going to be a no-brainer for me. And frankly, this is the kind of thing that somebody that's been in the private sector for a number of years and had a successful career there needs to come into the city and show the city how we can start operating more efficiently and save tax dollars. So that's the type of thing that I would bring to the Controller's Office.
And so just to kind of add on to that,
Sure.
because we talked about increasing the Controller's Office resources as far as human resources, but we also talked about the budget and the deficit. So how would you improve upon the current system to reach the city's goals without having, by having the least negative impact on the budget?
Well, when you implement these types of programs, you have a positive impact on the budget. You're spending less money. It doesn't take as many people to process things when you have good electronic systems and when you have good reporting systems. So those types of things should have a positive impact on the city and not a negative impact. A lot of these systems are not that expensive. If you build it from the ground up and you want to do it, a de novo system that you develop, sure, but there are systems out there that people have been using that can be easily adapted to the city. And Chris talked about ACH. I mean, my goodness, we were doing ACH payments 20 years ago in the private sector. So I know they've implemented it recently at the city and it's there, but it's not expensive doing some of these things. It actually saves money, and you free up people to do more thinking type things rather than just pushing paper around. And that's another good thing. You get better ideas out of people when they don't have to do as many mundane tasks.
And Chris, same question.
So I think this is the challenge is do these types of things in the budget framework. Mr. Frazier cites examples from the private sector, but I can assure you they probably had a lot more resources than the city currently has with a $126 million deficit. So the challenge is how do you roll these things out in a dwindling revenue scenario and with budget constraints. Again, when we put the checkbook online, that was a project that we basically had a zero budget target. We had to figure out how to develop this with using no additional budget. So the way that we can do that is partner with private firms, and for example, if there's a cost savings, we can share in that cost savings on the back end. We did this with the audit of the telecom for the airport. We were able to say, look, we don't have the money to go out and hire you to be auditors to go out and find this savings, but we will partner with you, and we'll take that on a contingency basis. So we had a split on the back end, and we ended up with a multi-million-dollar settlement that cost us up front nothing. Now, we did give up some of the savings, but this is a great example of kind of a public-private partnership, and it's things that I have specific experience about how to put a solution forward in a very tight budget constraints. If you have all the money in the world, you can do things like build robust new systems that they have in the private sector. But we're going to have to figure out how to do more with less, and that's something I have specific experience with.
So I'm going to stay on the technology topic for just a moment, because one of the things that we talked about in the technology forum that we had previously is the fact that actually the systems in the controller's office are separate from the rest of city government. So I'm curious, and we'll start with you, Chris. I wonder if you would speak to one, whether you think that the systems should be separate in the controller's office, and two, if so, how do you work across those two separate systems in a transparent way?
Mm-hmm. Well, sure. And just to clarify, our email servers are under the city's network, so we share that system. But our domain and our information servers are separate, and there's a reason for that. And we talked before about having the elected controller and having that independence. And we've dealt with this issue before. If we're working on a very sensitive audit, and we have a problem with our IT infrastructure, we don't want, say, for example, one of the department's IT, if, for example, we were auditing IT, we wouldn't want them to be able to go in then and see all the data of the things that we're auditing. There needs to be a separation of duties, and in maintaining that independent structure, unfortunately for the controller's office, it requires that we maintain our separate servers so that we can have data integrity, and we don't have to worry about that being shared with other departments from a security standpoint.
Well, I think there are ways where you can share systems and still have security. We serviced, as I mentioned, over 150 institutional lenders. We serviced their loans, and it was all on the same system, and they were always concerned about whether or not their competitors would have the ability to sneak in and see data that was competitive. There are ways to protect that data. But yeah, if there's a reason to keep it separate, it would be kept separate. The key is that you want to do things efficiently. You want to do things that cost the least amount of money. When the city redid its municipal court system, they tried to do it on their own, and they used some outside vendors. But about $40 million into the system, they called somebody else in, and they were able to develop it at a very low cost. I think it was like $5 million more, and they finally got the system completed. So the key is that you want the right people doing the right thing and developing these systems to help reduce costs. Like I said earlier, a lot of these things don't cost a lot of money, and in the long term, and even sometimes in the short term, they end up saving quite a bit of money.
You know the last question?
Well, I mean, do you have? So we are suffering from some sickness tonight, which is actually uncommon in our hour, but we have made it through almost all of our questions, and we
Okay.
still have some time remaining. So why don't you go ahead and ask the last prepared question, and then
Okay.
we'll shift to a little bit more of an ad hoc model.
Okay.
All right. So, it's kind of like if any of you play golf, this is, see the shot, right? So you're elected.
You're ahead of time. You've got some open holes behind you.
Exactly, right? So you're elected as a controller, and it's your last day in office. So, all right.
Okay.
What would you like to have been your greatest accomplishment in office?
Is that me?
Who's up?
Who's up?
Oh, Bill.
I'll-
you're up.
Yeah.
You know, that's pretty easy. I would like to have the voters, when I go out into the city and visit with the different taxpayer groups and super neighborhood groups and all the communities that I've been into, I would like for them to acknowledge that they have enough trust now in their city government so that they know that their tax dollars are being spent efficiently and they know where they're going. And I think that would be a good accomplishment. Balanced budget, sure, we'd like to see that. Pensions issues solved, sure, we would like to do that. But I think the missing ingredient that I see right now is that, you know, if we need to do some things, there's just not that level of trust. It's like, where did the drainage fee go? You know, they even call it the rain tax. You know, that's not good. These programs were approved by the voters, and they thought that they were going to accomplish certain things, and it hadn't happened. And they're not getting any clear, concise answers, and they don't feel comfortable with what's going on, and so it becomes a struggle. And yeah, there's some good things that the city's doing. I think that there's some great things that the city's doing, but I don't feel like there's that real solid level of trust in the financial side of the business. And I think that on my last day, if I can look back and that's been returned, I would feel very good about it.
Well, for me, you know, the top three are the priorities I mentioned earlier. I think first and foremost, looking back and saying, hey, we bridged that budget deficit. Not only did we do that, but by structurally balancing our budget, we put a significant amount of money into our undesignated reserve fund, and the city is a lot more financially healthy and in better shape. You always want to leave the office better than it was before you came in, and some of that is timing. But I think the real challenge is in the pensions, and I think I want to be able to say that I had played a meaningful role in helping the mayor and council member and the pension organizations, the pension funds, help to craft a mutually consensus-built solution that actually solves the problem, because we don't have a lot of time with this. And the more that we all sit around and point the finger, the larger these unfunded liabilities grow. And so, you know, I hope to be able to play a meaningful role in pushing forward that legislation that will be needed to reform things. And finally, I think, you know, the controller is an elected position, and we have a big city. And I was trying to count how many events I've been to this year. I think it's close to 800 all over the city. I think there hasn't been an area that I haven't been to. I went to 20 events this weekend, Friday and Saturday. So I want to be a controller that when people look back, they say, not only did this man help to solve our financial problems, but he is someone that represented all the interests of Houston from all the areas. And it's tough to balance all those different needs. But if I can help to play a role in that, I will think that that has been a very successful administration.
So I'm actually going to pick up on something that you just said, Chris, because given all that we've talked about the controller's role, particularly the fact that, you know, you owe your duties directly to the citizens as controller, I think it is critical for the city that you play a meaningful role in the pension dialogue. So my question is, in your views, what does a meaningful role in the pension dialogue look like for the city controller?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I think, you know, we talked before about not having a vote but having a voice. I've spent a lot of time looking at this issue. I've served on the Mayor's Long Range Management Financial Task Force. We had experts come in exhaustively and talk about all the different options. And I think that there are two widely divergent trains of thought on how to solve the pension problem. And what I hope to do is to be able to bring those two views together, again, not having a vote, but having a voice, and saying, look, it's probably unrealistic to balance the entire unfunded liability on the back of current retirees. That's just not fair. But we're going to have to make some tough choices. So, you know, we're going to have to get current employees to, you know, pay more into the system. The city's going to have to find the money in the budget to pay their deferred payments. And, you know, there'll have to be some other plan changes, I think, and I hope to be able to be someone that can have a practical, pragmatic, consensus-building role in that. And I think the controller definitely through the, and I hate to use the term bully pulpit, but that's the one that comes to mind, can be someone that can help to be a consensus builder, because I think it's vitally important for the future of the financial health of the city of Houston.
Well, I think the key role that the controller can take in the pension debate is to make sure that the financial aspects of what's being proposed are thoroughly vetted and tested. Because what happened, the reason we're in this situation now is because some promises were made 12 years ago, and everybody thought they were on the same page, and there were some proposals made and put into place, and then all of a sudden, a couple years later, there was, oops, well, we didn't think that was going to happen, and we didn't think it was going to cost that much. And so I believe that somebody who's got the background and experience of negotiating complex financial transactions, and who's done pro formas, who can sit down and talk to people and make sure that you do sensitivity testing on every aspect of it, so that if 60% of the employees pick a certain provision, this is what's going to happen, and if 20 do, this is going to happen. And so you can draft out various pro formas to show what's going to happen and can we afford it. That's a key issue. Plus, I've been involved in trying to get the city more local control over this. Right now, the legislature has a very key role. They have to approve any changes that we make. There is some sort of local option on the police and the municipal workers, but it still needs legislative approval. But we need to be able to negotiate directly with our employees or their representatives, and that means their unions. So it's not like city council and the mayor can cram down something to the employees. It will be a negotiated process. And I've worked very closely with State Representative Jim Murphy and State Senator Paul Betancourt to try to get some legislation passed. It's going to take a long time to do that. It's not going to happen overnight. But there has to be some sort of legislative approval on this, like it or not. We can't just make the change. So I've been working very closely with those two gentlemen, and I've also been working very closely in the private sector to try to get many Houston business organizations aware of this. In the Houston Chronicle endorsement, they said that, I ran for office 2 years ago and raised a lot of these issues, and I'm back again raising them again. And I think the controller needs to be out in the community to talk to all the stakeholders, and the taxpayer is another major stakeholder. And so I believe that the controller needs to represent the taxpayer and make sure that once we arrive at a decision, that decision can stick, because we've only got one shot at this, and we got to get it right this time.
Thank you. Well, that was not so ad hoc after all, because we've reached the end of our hour.
Okay.
So at this point, we'll start with you, Chris, and I'll give each of you the opportunity to take about a minute and talk to our viewers at home about why you want to be our next city controller, why you think they should vote for you.
Well, thank you again for having me here tonight. I am a person that has found myself with a unique blend of public and private sector experience, now totaling 20 years. I'm the only candidate that has the on-the-job training and day-to-day experience to be able to go and work for you, the taxpayer, on day one, addressing these financial challenges and being a watchdog. I think it's important to note, in order to be a watchdog, you need to know what to look for, and I have experience in knowing what to look for as your next city controller. I think finally, and Mr. Frazier alluded to this, is that his solution for the pension, for example, is going to take a lot of time, and that's something we don't have. We need to be able to have the next city controller come in and help to bridge consensus and help build coalitions that solve problems immediately, because time is our enemy at this point, and we have a dire financial situation that we need to address day one. And as your next city controller, I look forward to doing that by having the experience to come into the office and get to work day one. And I appreciate your vote, Chris Brown, for controller. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Frazier?
Well, the status quo doesn't work anymore. We need to make a change. If we don't start making changes now, when? We've had these issues for the last 12 years. They've been building up, and so we need somebody to get into office and start making change now. I'm a certified public accountant. I'm uniquely qualified for this position. I've got the endorsement of all the West Side and Central business leaders. I've got the endorsement of the Baptist Ministers Association of Greater Houston, the Church of God in Christ, and the Houston Chronicle, the Jewish Herald Voice. Many of these people understand that we've got some serious financial issues, and they need a professional in this job that can get things done now and start making some very serious changes. So I ask for your support and your vote, And Election Day is Saturday, not Tuesday, but Saturday. So please go out and vote and tell all your friends to vote. So thank you very much for having me here tonight.
Thank you. Well, I would like to thank both of our guests, Mr. Brown and Mr. Fraser, for joining us tonight, and also my co-host, Quentin Welts, for taking the time out to come with me and educate the voters on the candidates on their ballot for Houston City Controller. I hope it's become clear to you from this discussion, if you didn't already know, and many of you at home are smarter than me, so maybe you did, but the City Controller is a very important position. It's the person working directly for you to make sure your tax dollars are spent properly for this city. So I encourage you, if you haven't had the chance to read about these two candidates, to do so. You can visit vote411.org for the League of Women Voters information on the two candidates, and for information on all of the candidates that will be on your ballot when you go vote on Saturday. The other thing I want to mention is, if you didn't have a chance to view this video live or any of the conversations that we've had with other candidates on your ballot, you can look at it later on the League of Women Voters Vimeo channel. And you can also find out additional information about the current election cycle at houston.vote. So again, on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Houston Education Fund and Houston Media Source, I'd like to thank you for joining us. Have a good night.